Let's head to Hamilton, dairy farming capital of the country. There we find Hayden Dillon. He's the head of agribusiness for Findex, formerly known as Crow Horth, of course, our accounting partners here on the country. Look, there is a capital crunch out there at the moment for farmers, and we're in the ironical situation of interest rates never been lower, and Hayden about to go lower tomorrow, you would think, when the Reserve Bank lowers the OCR. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Jamie. Yes, it's a very unique situation and one that's creeping up probably rather slowly. Externally, we've got some good payout numbers for our milk solids, and our sheep and beef is looking pretty good. So, and even the climate, we're looking okay there. So externally, everyone should be reasonably happy, but with the Reserve Bank actions around the increase in costing the capital of the banks, and their strong administration that the banks must follow their own lending policies to farming, we are seeing a very, very tight credit crunch with particularly dairy farming and sheep and beef. And the banks are becoming quite unwilling to work with our clients around accessing cash.
I saw Shane Jones on Q&A last night saying the Aussie banks have got to pull their heads in. They're not going to drive New Zealand farmers out of business. It's not that bad, is it?
Yeah, it is. I think when you actually have to go and have the conversation with your bank, and this is what we're seeing, it's a bit of a slow-moving event, this. You're feeling pretty confident because maybe you haven't heard from your bank, which isn't necessarily a good thing at the moment. You might even be paying your principal back, and until you realise that perhaps after the last few months you need a bit of working capital, or you need some development funding, and you go and talk to your bank and you get told that, no, you can't have any capital or you can't have any further funding. I think that's when the number of clients are realising that this is considerably different to what it was, say, with the GFC. In fact, we're finding it probably harder than the GFC, where the banks are just absolutely rationing the capital and being very rigid on lending criteria.
How much of this is due to domestic government policy?
I think there's three things that are happening, and they've all come together to create quite a problem, and maybe one of these things at one time and over a period of time would be able to be managed, but the OAO has certainly had an impact on the value of land and the demand for land, so we don't have any foreign capital coming in for our largest part of our farming business, which is our sheep, beef and dairy and our productive assets there. So that's had an absolute flow-on effect around confidence, and particularly the larger farms just can't sell. And the second one is the visas, taking a long time to get them approved, and obviously the real uncertainty around the ETS, the impact and costs on that. That's only after we work through the impacts around limitations with nitrogen and so forth, and everyone having to get their environmental plans in place. So they're all into one category. Then you roll over the Reserve Bank changes. We all know about the bank's proposal to increase the cost of capital on banks. Banks have made that really clear that they will have a negative impact on them. People smarter than me, including our friend Nathan Penny's talked about the impact it will have on the economy around reducing GDP. But that's part of the story. The second part of that story from the Reserve Bank is that they've been very strict with the banks around ensuring they mustn't enter their approved lending policies. That in itself is catching out a number of clients at the moment when they're going in to ask for additional capital, thinking their equity's probably okay. They have been paying back principal, but technically they're outside the lending criteria, and that's been a bit of a shock for our clients. So there's a lot more work to do for clients to get access to capital now than there ever was before.
Hayden Dillon from Findex is talking the credit crunch, the capital crunch on farming. Hayden, look, what can farmers do about this situation? Because at the moment they've got to live within the bounds of what they're given.
Yeah, so Jamie, I think a couple of things. First of all, don't make the assumption that because you haven't heard from your bank, things are okay. First of all, you want to test and maybe talk to your banker and actually see where you sit as far as the bank's concerned from a credit perspective, understanding your equity position and your ability to repay your debt. The second thing you'll need to think about if you are looking at a new project, whether it be to improve productivity, whether it's to even maybe look at the next door neighbour because you've got the strength to do it, you do actually need to do a lot more due diligence. You need to be providing them at least a 5-year plan, a cash flow plan showing your ability to service not only the debt, but if you're paying debt, you've got to start paying tax, which is an unusual thing for farmers to be looking at, because banks aren't interested in having interest only. They want to see principal repaid, and they're happy to lend it back to you if that's the case.
Do you think this government is hell-bent on bashing farming, especially dairy farming?
Jamie, I have to stand back and I can only comment on what we're seeing. The attitude of the Reserve Bank and the ferocity with which it's making these changes in agri the OIO impact, and then you overlay that with a third part with all these environmental factors, it is absolutely hurting the dairy industry particularly. I'm not sure why. The dairy industry is trying its best to respond. We're very fortunate we've got a good payout, but this is putting huge pressure on the industry, and we're yet to see the impacts of it. It'll slowly catch up with us probably in the spring. The banks are sitting on farms that they can't exit. We've had one client there where the bank wouldn't sell them up but wouldn't give them cash either because there was no exit for them. So it's become quite a distressing time, and I'm not really sure what the end game is.
Do you know what the end game is? Is paying your way in the world, and the sooner the government gets its head around the fact that farming, particularly the dairy industry, the biggest primary sector act in town, is paying the bills, the better, if you ask me. So Jacinda, Grant and Winnie, take note and listen. Hayden Dillon from Findex, thank you very much for your time.
Great, thanks, Jamie.